Todas. A gente vai dar início ao nosso painel, Tendências e Implementação de Inteligência Artificial, uma perspectiva crítica do Sul Global. Como a gente tem palestrantes fora do Brasil e fora da América Latina, especificamente o BOI, a gente vai conduzir o painel em inglês para poder facilitar a troca e a reflexão entre todos aqui e todas. Mas fiquem também à vontade, caso queiram também falar em outras línguas, a gente vai fazendo alguns ajustes se forem necessários. I'm going to move to English. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel Trends in AI Implementation, a Critical Perspective from Global South. My name is Bruno Bioni. I'm Executive Director of Data Privacy Brazil, which is a space of intersection between two organizations, and a school and also a research association. And specifically in the research association, we are conducting some research projects dealing with the AI and specifically trying to frame this debate from a perspective from the Global South. And in this sense, I would like to also thank Direitos Digitais, in special Jamila here, and also Michelle for the partnership, and also for co-organizing this panel with us. We are establishing a partnership. So last week, actually, we just concluded a course on AI in the Global South. It was very, very, very insightful with decision makers from academia, civil society, also private sector, and government, so a multi-stakeholder fashion. And of course, I'd like to thank you, our distinguished panelists, because we admire so much your work that you have been conducting. So it's a key moment for us to have this discussion and share our impressions here today. Thank you. Gracias. The main objective, the goal of this panel is to enlarge the reflection to the Global South, by exploring our commonalities, but also our difference by trying to tackle this AI and emerging technology in general. We have like a twofold goal here. The first one is to present the state of the art of AI systems and actually the implementations that are being done and conducted across different regions and countries in the Global South, with particular focus on the public sector. And secondly, we are going to discuss how these scenarios generate particular challenges to regulators and also for the civil society alike, considering the interplay with structural aspects of subalternity and also colonialism, as well individual realities of each country. Right now in Brazil, I think it's important to contextualize the discussion that we are having here in Brazil. We have right now 3 pending bills that are being discussing in the Brazilian Parliament. Recently, actually a few months ago, the Brazilian Senate created a commission of jurists that are analyzing those 3 bills, and the main goal is to present a new draft that could achieve a better balance, not only to guarantee fundamental rights and also individual liberties of the citizens, but also to foster socio-economic development as well. So I finish here, and I'd like to invite Bowie, which is us attending this event virtually. I don't know if you could hear us well, Bowie. If you could also turn on your camera, thank you, and activate your audio. Yeah, so Bowie, thank you so much for being here with us today again. Bowie accepted several invitations from Data Privacy Brazil and also Direitos Digitais, because a few weeks ago we also held an online seminar, and we are again together here. So Bowie, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
All right, hello everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Inclui. I'm an African from Nigeria. on the session speaking to the perspective from Global South in the implementation of artificial intelligence system. My presentation is going to be very brief, as I understand that there are other speakers and there needs to be some time for question and answer. So I just want to speak briefly to some perspective, with respect to implementation of AI system in Global South. I come from the civil society perspective, and what I really want to talk about is from that point of view. The first thing I want to talk is to situate this conversation as centered around policy and people. People in the context of how the people of Africa specifically have embraced artificial intelligence systems. The AI implementation ecosystem in Africa is a public space and it creates a conversation about people and policy, as I have just said. Because people, innovators, are working very hard and forging ahead to replicate and even sometimes, if possible, catch up with global development on artificial intelligence. And we have several examples of deployment or development of AI systems in most parts of the world. In Kenya, for example, as of last year, there are at least 31 AI startups. In Nigeria, we were trying to use artificial intelligence system to classify parliamentary bills from the National Assembly with the aim of making them, accessible to the people. In South Africa, the Department of Science and Innovation Funds. This is a research network of 9 groups across 6 universities in South Africa. We're working, doing research specifically on artificial intelligence. A university in South Africa, University of Witwatersrand, recently designed an AI-based algorithm partnership with iTemba Labs, the provincial government of Gauteng and York University in Canada, to show the risk incidence of the third wave of COVID-19 in South Africa at the time. Many more examples, also in Kenya, there was a locally designed AI solution that will be developed to assist farmers in producing farming equipment or in making decisions about the optimal time to sow or to breed certain type of crops. In Nigeria, as in many African cities, growing communities of young data scientists are coming together to refine their skills in machine learning and advanced new AI-driven technologies and industry. So what I'm saying in essence is that there is very interesting developments around AI systems in Africa, in the Global South generally. Young people are coming up with ideas, and of course collaboration also between the global North, who are also trying to sell AI technology to the Global South. But there are concerns around all of this. There are concerns in terms of the fact that Africa is dominated by foreign technology and AI firms that do not necessarily support the realization of national development priorities, such as those outlined in the United Nations 230 Sustainable Development Goals, or worse. Many of those companies, through their intervention, are exacerbating exclusion and oppression for certain groups, particularly women. And these are not the only concerns that we have when it comes to adoption of AI technology systems in this part of the world. I think I must also talk about the fact that there are issues around discrimination, there are issues around bias, exclusion, and of course, at the heart of all of these, there are issues around terrible bad designs. For example, we're having a conversation yesterday around automated decision making adopted by many of the biggest technology companies and platforms, and how sometimes the designs are flawed and are hardly sufficient to address the challenges of the black people, or if you like, the African continent. And when we are talking about discrimination as well, we also have seen how discrimination that has played out in the physical world has been translated into the deployment of AI systems. Talk about exclusion, excluded groups such as people living with disabilities, or persons with disabilities, to use the right language, women, and traditionally excluded groups, how those exclusions have also been transferred or transposed into AI systems within our context as Africans. But from the policy side of things, what I think I want to highlight is that policy has largely remained stagnant and waiting to be fulfilled. There are some positive. There have been policy responses emerging on the continent. For example, Egypt, from Mauritius, from Rwanda, they are the first African countries to publish national AI strategies. South Africa has joined that conversation. Nigeria and Kenya are also, talking about developing such strategy. But you would agree with me that they are already late to the party. But we also need to talk about the fact that we have dealing with a fractured data environment in those parts of the world. And also, the quality of the data collection is also cause for concern in the global South countries generally. Building, maintaining, and appropriate data-building technologies are therefore bedeviled by a lot of infrastructural challenges, which are not exactly being addressed while we try to adopt AI systems. So it's almost like we are assuming that it is okay to adopt AI systems even without fixing our basic technological, or infrastructural problems. What I want to dwell on really is the policy challenges that I spoke to earlier. The fact that we are late to the party with respect to developing AI strategies. Unfortunately, we seem to be waiting for the EU in most cases to come and fulfill us the same way they have done with respect to developing, for example, data policy or data protection frameworks. But the disadvantage of those is that when we have to depend on external factors or external actors to do this for us, we are unfortunately going to experience what I call putting our priorities, our interests at the background, because when the EU comes, for example, to support Africa to develop frameworks, I mean, they're not doing it because they are so kind and nice. They are doing it because they are also looking after themselves. And no matter what frameworks that they design or that they help Africans to build, it is going to first secure the interest of EU, of course, and their partners. Sometimes it's not EU, sometimes it's the United States for international development, sometimes it's other international development partners. But the point I'm trying to make is that if Africa does not prioritize this issue in terms of developing its own AI strategies, in terms of prioritizing its own issues, contextualizing its own issues, and ensuring that it gets involved as early as possible in the conversation, then whatever becomes of the ecosystem is going to be dependent on what the global north feel is the best for us. So the point, however, is that it is very significant and important for Africa to wake up to the challenges of the 21st century, of the digital revolution, and not have to always wait to be spoon-fed by either the EU, whether the US, or other interests from the global north. And finally, let me mention that the African Union has taken steps recently to also develop independent research into AI systems, into how it affects the continent, into how some of the issues that I highlighted earlier, issues around discrimination, bias, exclusion, bad design, how it affects its people, and to be able to come up with an Afrocentric strategy, around deployment and development of AI systems. But as I said, this is still late to the party, but as they say, it's better late than never. So that's a welcome development from the civil society perspective, and it's also a process that we are more than happy to engage with. The final thing I'm going to say before I see the microphone is to also say that a trajectory that we have also noticed is that in this part of the world, in Africa and the rest of the global south, public authority hardly consult or leverage the expertise that exists outside of government to develop policy, regulatory framework around many of these systems. And it will interest you to know that in Europe, we get invited to the conversation, even as Africans, as African CSOs organization. I'm currently sitting on a platform that's being coordinated by the Danish government, as an example, around conversation on addressing the harms created by AI systems. My own government would hardly invite me to such conversation. So I also think it's very important to also highlight the need for African government to consult more with its own people, with its own, with expertise that exists outside of government, to be able to bring such perspectives, such as the harm that AI systems can create, so that when we develop policies, when we develop regulatory frameworks, we are able to create a system that takes care of different perspectives to the issues, or different understanding to the issues. I think that is one important thing that Africa, that the global south must realize and understand early on in the game. We seem to approach policy from the perspective of relying on consultants to just draft a document for us and then we introduce it to our people, or we rely on the EU or some of our foreign partners to come and come and just introduce this policy for us. We cannot continue to follow that trajectory. We need to leverage our own expertise, our own system, so that we can do what's more like a tailor-made type of regulation that addresses our internal problem, our peculiar issue, and that bring prosperity to our people. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I not overspent my time, but I try as much as possible to keep the time. Thank you very much. If there are any questions at some point during the conversation, I will be happy to respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bowie. As usual, your reflections were extremely insightful. Yeah, and perfectly in terms of time. You asked it like 12 minutes as we agreed before. I'd like to pass immediately for Jamila Venturini. Jamila Venturini is Executive Director of Derechos Digitales, that is going to conduct several research on AI and automation. Jamila, thank you.
Thank you, Bruno, and thank you also for the partnership in developing this panel. We're very happy to have this conversation here. I guess it's a very privileged space to open this debate or to expand on this debate. And also thank you, Paola and Maya, for joining us, and Boy for the excellent intervention. As Bruno mentioned, I'm here on behalf of Derechos Digitales, which is a Chilean-based nonprofit organization that works as the intersection of digital technologies and human rights across Latin America. And since 2020, we have been intensively working on AI, mainly focusing on the use of automated systems at the public sector and decision-making on its adoption and regulation. And why did we decide to look into how AI is being implemented at the public sector? Is because we understand that there is an ongoing strategy to advance towards data collection and data exploitation at the Global South from major tech companies through agreements with the private sector. And I will explore a bit more of that, or how that reflects on what we see in practice. The context in which we are immersed in Latin America is marked by three main characteristics that I want to share with you today. The first one is that several countries have advanced in the adoption or drafting of AI strategies that aims to deal with the possibilities and risks of the use of these technologies. Some of them are Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Uruguay, Mexico, and Peru, and they have developed or are in the process of developing their strategies. However, in most cases, public participation was limited in the process of drafting, particularly because it failed to involve the groups that might be most affected by the use of these technologies, like women, like Black people in the case of Brazil, in the case of Colombia particularly, in other cases where you have a significant Black community, indigenous groups, and groups that are already being affected by policies that are mediated through AI. You also see a failure from the government institutions to provide disaggregated data on how they allow the representation of such groups when you have like general consultations or general participation processes like you had in Brazil. Besides that, it's important to notice that you also have an underrepresentation of Latin America, actually, from Global South perspectives in the global debates on AI and ethics, and you have already some research pointing out to that, that are driving most of these conversations, even inside Latin American countries. And in the end, these debates will shape national dialogues in several cases. Here in Brazil, we can see, for instance, the influence of the OECD recommendations, but several Latin American countries has also adopted these OECD recommendations, despite the fact that they are not OECD members, and therefore they have not been involved and engaged significantly in the conversations that generated these recommendations. At the same time, while several initiatives dialogue with ethical standards involving the development and use of AI, they also respond to market pressures to guarantee legal environments that can foster their commercial interests. And let's recall here that Latin America is a region that mostly consumes technology and not necessarily produces technology. Production is generally localized and incipient in several cases. I bring again the case of Brazil because we are right now, as Bruno mentioned, discussing an AI regulation with an expert commission that was created to advance on some draft bills that were rushly approved last year at the deputy chamber. And the bills that are being discussed right now, they are basically based in principles that in the end give a blanket authorization for the development and implementation of any form of AI, regardless of any positive obligations on the realization, for instance, of impact assessment, the existence of guarantees that they won't impact on the exercise of fundamental rights. And just because I mentioned briefly the OECD recommendations, which were adopted by several countries in the region, we have right now the UNESCO recommendations on ethics and AI, which is a much broader initiative and had a very intensive process of consultations. And the UNESCO recommendations are already stating that you need to have diverse transdisciplinary participation in the development of AI regulation, and that you should have regulation that foster the development of human rights impact assessment previous to the implementation, as well as limitations on the use of technologies that have not this type of guarantee. The second point I want to share with you is that even in the absence of proper regulation, and I'm not only talking about regulation specifically on an AI, you have also lack of regulation in terms of data protection in several Latin American countries. Institutions and procedures to guarantee rights, for instance, the right to access to information, as I said, data protection and privacy, despite the absence of that or or outdated policies or outdated norms, countries have not hesitated in adopting AI even at the public administration. They do so usually under a rhetoric of protecting and promoting social good. Several of the initiatives that we have mapped seem to target particularly vulnerable groups, exposing them to interventions that, on the one hand, they are not able to consent with, on the other hand, without a normative and institutional framework that assures enough safeguards and protections against abuse. Let's remember that, as I said, several Latin American countries still don't have a proper national data protection framework in place. Others do have data protection frameworks in place, but are at the beginning of the creation of a data protection culture inside their institutions, inside the market, etc. Like I could mention the case of Brazil. The result is that people have little autonomy regarding their participation on this usually pilot experiences in AI implementation at the public sector, or the possibility to appeal to decisions that are made based on information that they don't control. And I make a parenthesis here in the presentation I had prepared to mention two things. One is that usually the information that you have some automatized processing of data behind some implementation is not always transparent to people. And I'm also considering a concept of AI, talking about AI implementation at the public sector, which is a broad concept, and talking about the limitations on the possibility to appeal to decisions. A concrete example that we have analyzed in Derechos Digitales is the example of the emergency assistance program that was implemented during the pandemic, which was a program to offer emergency cash transfers in a moment of extreme necessity in the country, and that was fully mediated by an application, an online application. To be able to apply to receive this support, you had to do it through an application, and behind the operation of the application, you have the crossing of several databases that would indicate if a person was or not able to receive assistance. The system had several errors, beginning from the fact that a lot of people couldn't access the mobile application because they didn't have access to a mobile phone with the needed characteristics that the system required, or even to connectivity. But you also had errors regarding databases that were outdated or they were incorrect, etc. And there was no mechanisms for appeal, which generated, in that case, an overload at the judicial system. It's a very illustrative case of this. You have a very vulnerable group being attended, you have a very sensitive policy area, and you have tech mediation and some level of automation that is invisible to people, and you don't have conditions to appeal to the decisions that are made. Although the normative would give such conditions that Bruno could explore even more. I won't mention facial recognition, which we will discuss more in a panel this afternoon with my colleagues at Al-Sur, but it's also something that has been growing, has been advancing in the region. But I can mention the case of Alerta Niñez, which was also a case studied by Derechos Digitales in Chile, and that involves the processing and potential sharing of sensitive information from minors with third parties, to rate children and adolescents according to their possibility to suffer any form of abuse. That's in general the language that is used on the program. It's basically a risk classification system, but it is based on the use of databases that seem to privilege data from poorer communities in leaving wealthier families outside of the program of risk classification. In that sense, what we see is not human rights or privacy by design, but we see a trend of discrimination by design, exclusion by design, as Boy mentioned before. The guarantees that are offered to data subjects are minimum, including regarding the safeguards against future use of such information that could result in discrimination. I talked a bit about this yesterday, but I guess it's something interesting to bring to this conversation too. In the countries where you have data protection norms, you have usually exceptions for the exceptions of consent for the use of data for the development of public policies. And I guess a question that we have is how this applies to derivative uses of data that were collected by the state for certain uses and that are being now shared for experimental uses, pilot projects with third parties, including major tech companies. So some final points on things that we found from our research. You have severe limitations on access to information and transparency, and an absence of public participation not only on the drafting of regulation, but also on the decisions that will allow the use of an AI systems. We have identified a trend of establishment of public-private partnerships that are marked by direct collaborations without further discussion, social discussion in different levels, and considerations on legality, necessity, and proportionality of implementation that can restrict the exercise of fundamental human rights. A general lack of impact assessments, as I said, of periodic evaluations, and of supervision mechanisms with or without public participation, I will stress, which contradicts completely the idea of policy making based on evidence. In this case, you have like a blind trust on technology that will help solving very complex social problems that we still have in the region. We understand that innovation is more than welcome and is needed in the region. We understand that technology may allow the development and foster the exercise of human rights, but any type of innovation or experimentation cannot come at the expenses of proper safeguards. On the contrary, the implementation of AI in Latin America could represent an opportunity for local development that is grounded in human rights, and regulation could have a role in fostering this type of development. I will keep it there because I know I extended a bit more than my time, but I guess that's a key point to continue discussing on the questions and the discussion we'll have later. Thank you.
Obrigado, Jamila. Thank you, Jamila. I will pass the floor for Maya Levi-Daniel, who is Research Associate at the Centro de Estudios en Tecnología y Sociedad de Universidad de San Andrés. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks all for being here. As Bruno mentioned, my name is Maya Levi-Daniel. I'm a research associate at the Center for Studies on Technology and Society, CETIS, which is an academic center focused on digital policies and development, based in Buenos Aires in Universidad de San Andrés. And over the past few years, from CETIS, we've been working on various projects on the implementation of algorithms in the private and public sectors, in Latin America particularly. So today, I'm going to focus my presentation on how the public sector is implementing algorithms, what my co-panelists have been discussing as well. And I will focus on a few things that I think can be improved about the implementation process and how to improve them. I will focus on a few of them. I know there are more. So nowadays, we know that many governments are implementing algorithms to automate tasks in different ways. So just to mention a couple examples. In Europe, for example, a case in the UK, I think that it's very interesting that the UK Home Office implementing a visa streaming algorithm to filter visa applications. And in 2020, 5 years after its launch, the government was required by a court to suspend its use due to concerns relating to unconscious bias and racism. Then in Italy, we have this Buona Scuola algorithm. The Italian government implemented an algorithm again to evaluate and enforce mobility requests from teachers in the public education system without human oversight. So the algorithm ended up assigning teachers to wrong professional destinations and resulted in judicial claims by around 10,000 teachers. And we, as Jamila has already mentioned, in Latin America, we have many examples in different countries, in Brazil, in Argentina, and we have like different types of algorithms doing different tasks. For example, there's an example in Brazil that in which a government agency implemented an algorithm to match vacancies with people looking for jobs, or a more problematic case in Argentina in which an algorithm predicted teen pregnancies using very sensitive data. So we have a lot of examples in Europe, in Latin America, and in, I think, every region. And in general, the main reasons governments at least mention when implemented these systems is that algorithms make more objective decisions and they speed up the decision-making processes. So arguably, AI systems are more objective and faster than humans when making decisions. However, we are now well aware that although algorithms can make things faster in some cases, they can also entail important risks for human rights, such as the right to privacy and the right not to be discriminated against, among many others. But governments usually celebrate the mere fact of implementing technology, and I found that this example was really illustrative. I came across by chance with this ad by the government of Peru, in which they say that they are the first country in America to implement AI in the employment field. So it doesn't matter how AI is being implemented or the reasons why it is implemented. We are like celebrating the fact that we are using technology, that we are using AI. And I believe that this was somehow fostered by the pandemic, because we depended on the technologies to trace COVID cases and to stop the spread. And as we know, this gave governments more power as well. And this techno-solutionism is becoming the norm in various sectors. However, when we are talking about the public sector, there's an additional component, I think, that is that finally taxpayers are the ones paying for the technology the government officials decide to implement. And we have a right to know what they are doing and why. So I'd like to make 3 points, although there are many perspectives to take into account when designing and implementing algorithms. But in the first place, in general, and according to the results they are getting and that we are seeing, the analysis the public sector is doing to decide if they need to implement technology for decision-making processes might be incorrect. And here I say might because we don't have that information. The information is not public, as Jamila was mentioning about transparency in the public sector. In the second place, the public sector might not be correctly identifying the problem they are intending to solve. And finally, in their analysis, they are not taking human rights into account. So to address the first point, I would like to mention that earlier this year, from CETIS and Derechos Digitales, we developed a course for decision makers who were already working on implementing AI systems or were planning to implement AI systems. And in this course, we particularly emphasized that the implementation of AI systems, or actually any public policy, should be analyzed in its 4 different phases. That is, the diagnosis, the design, the implementation phase, and finally, evaluation. So relating to the first point, the diagnosis phase, it's crucial to ask what the current scenario is and identify the specific problem the AI systems will seek to address. So we should ask, why do we need algorithms in this particular case? As we So before, sometimes the implementation of the technology is a success in itself, but taking into account that this technology may entail serious problems to civil and human rights, and also that they are expensive, we need to think we need to think in detail if they are necessary. So, and this is related to the second point about the identification of the problems. So in this case, I would pose two questions that would be, first, we need to ask, is a problem being correctly identified? And in the second place, is a solution found the best one to address this particular problem? So we should ask if there are any other alternatives, and more importantly, if there's evidence that shows that AI would be a better tool. Because, again, building AI systems is expensive, and the funds come from taxpayers, so are there other alternatives that could be less expensive? And again, this is why transparency on these issues in the public sector must be mandatory. Because as citizens, we have a right to know how these processes are being conceived, how they are being designed, the reasons governments choose to implement technologies, and the risks involved. So, and maybe governments, or at least some of them, are posing these questions and are actually looking for evidence to support the decision of implementing technology, but we don't know that because we don't have the information, and we cannot see that. So finally, it's crucial that this analysis is made from a human rights perspective from the beginning of the process. So we should ask from the beginning, do AI systems in this particular case bring any risks to civil and human rights? And just to frame this analysis, I think there's a study that I find interesting by the Bergman Klein Center that develops a useful test. They say that that governments should, well, not particular, but anyone should state that when analyzing the possibility of implementing AI systems, in this case, governments should, in the first place, determine a baseline. So we should try to analyze where we are right now. And in the second place, evaluate the potential impact of AI systems on human rights. So if the implementation of the technology increases the possibility of having a negative impact on human rights, then the decision should be not to implement it. So obviously, this won't solve all the problems. We can then have problems in the data or in how the algorithm is designed and implemented. But I believe that these 3 points I suggest here can be a good start and a good framework to take into account during the whole process of implementation. So these 3 points are that governments should take into account that the implementation of any technology must be thoroughly justified and must be based on concrete evidence, particularly when we are talking about the public sector. In the second place, governments must be transparent when making these decisions. They must clearly state the reasons they have to implement algorithms and why they are a better option in that particular case. And finally, governments must take the potential negative impact on human rights into account, but from the outset, like from the diagnosis phase. And I'll keep it there. We can continue then the conversation.
Gracias, Maya. Thank you, Maya. So now I invite Paola, who is researcher and professor of Department of Media and Digital Culture at the University of Monterrey. So she's going to share with us another scope and in order to address the AI from the feminist perspective. Thank you, Paula.
Obrigada, Bruno. Obrigada, Yamila, por la invitación. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I love to be here after such a long time without seeing anyone. So I'm going to speak about a project that we have, but first I would like to talk a little bit about a general approach to understand AI within a feminist framework. So let me try to see where is this. I think this is right. So many technologies. So I entitled my presentation AI and the long and winding road to the policies we need. And the project that I'm going to talk about is the Incubating Feminist AI from and for the Global South. First, why feminist AI? And this is a very problematic question for some people. But I would like to begin saying that in the current historical moment, we are witnessing how algorithmic governmentality contributes to the deepening of north-south systemic asymmetries, but also to the deepening of structural violence in our countries. So I argue that AI, hegemonic AI, is becoming a more powerful force capable of perpetrating global violence through three processes, which are datafication, algorithmization, and automation. And we need to understand how these processes are interconnected, but also we need to understand that these processes operate at three different levels: the macro-systemic level, the meso-level of institutions, and also the micro-political level of subjectivities. I'm not going to speak about all these dimensions, but I'm going to speak about the institutional level, in which AI is used as a component of a specific social system and has a complex, it's a complex set of actors, relationships, interests, and social norms, cultural practices, and institutional arrangements ruled by an algorithmic governmentality. So AI mediates institutional management as an invisible infrastructure, and at the same time mediates the relationship between the institutions and society. So in post-colonial states, government automation is reproduced through algorithmic coloniality, which is naturalized through public policies. So for me, it's important to understand that when we speak about public policy, we need to locate the impact of public policy in all these dimensions. So our project, I'm going to come back again to the presentation. Our project is trying to address these power asymmetries, and it's trying not only to unveil how these oppressions are interlocked, but also to provide a new approach or new vision about how to develop technologies, but also how to develop public policies. So we are at a critical turning point. New approaches to policymaking are needed, and of course, my previous colleagues already mentioned what are the problems with policymaking in our current historical moment. So I put this diagram, which I think it's very illustrative of the situation. The trend in tech and AI policy is patriarchal by design, but when we say patriarchal, we say neo-colonial, and we say neoliberal also. So we have many problems. And I think that all these problems should be taken in a holistic approach, as Jamila said. So I'm concerned, for example, when I hear people talking only about data biases, because if we only focus on one of the dimensions, we are not going to solve, of course, anything. So what can AI do to correct historical inequalities and promote social problems? I used here some prompts that we were given for the presentation. So this is the project, and I'm not sure if I can, I think it doesn't work, like. Let me try to. Sí, no. Quería ver si se presentaba la. Déjame. Ajá. El volumen no se ve. El volumen, no, perdón, no se escucha. Ya queremos que el volumen se oiga. ¿El audio no tiene? Oh. ¿Perdón? No tiene el audio, dice. Ok, bueno. Bueno, no pasa nada. Well, this is a project. It's an initiative from the A+ Alliance. This is a network of activists, academics, and technologists. And we are trying to promote the development of AI systems with a feminist perspective. So I'm going to stop the video because we cannot listen to it. Thank you. I'm going to come back to the presentation. Apologies. So, the project is intended to support multidisciplinary teams located in the Global South. And the process is composed by 3 phases. The first step is to write papers. Then the second step is to develop prototypes, and the third is to develop the pilot. So the first cohort was already delivered the papers. You can access the papers here in this on this website. These are the 3 projects that were selected for the first cohort. So we have here 3 organizations: Data Género, Fundación Vía Libre, and Derechos Digitales. So we are super happy to have this first attempt to give an answer of how technologies can be developed with different principles and within a different framework. So these 3 projects are part of the intention to provide alternatives to the development of AI technology in this case in Latin America. What are the things that we are looking for with this project? Trying to find different models of allocation and distribution that are made more possible or more equitable through the creation and or innovative use of new data or big data in algorithmic decision-making systems. So part of the proposal is that we need, of course, different models if we want different outcomes. then develop different algorithmic applications, and also feminist data collection and deployment. So of course, this is only one of, or three of the possibilities to define or promote the development of different AI technologies. So the second question was, is it possible to have a feminist framework for developing AI? And of course, our answer is yes. Of course, we can develop an alternative feminist and decolonial framework. But of course, this is not a unique, we don't have a unique and universal answer. We don't have only one answer. We think that we need different approaches and different responses to this question. So here are some of the publications that we have. Of course, here the project of Derechos Digitales is included here because it's, again, a way to say, here is our proposal, and we think that we can do it if we do it collectively, of course. So how can we decolonize and depatriarchalize AI? And for me, of course, the answer is not simple, but we need to look into different epistemologies. I think we need to move away from universal models of the world. We need also alternative models, technological, but also alternative models of existence, and alternative methodologies, alternative ways of doing things together. So, of course, there are no simple answers, but at least we are trying to provide different original views to this problem, and we think that public policies cannot be developed only among people from the government, from the public sector, but also with the communities, as Jamila also said, with the communities that are going to be affected by these technologies. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Paola. So thank you so much for the excellent presentations. I took some notes here from all the interventions and the talks. I'd like to share and highlight 4 key messages from the panelists. I think the first one is try to frame a proper vocabulary or terminology to deal with this new phenomenon. And all of the speakers already mentioned that it's important to retake colonialism and also a movement of resistance of subalternity in this field. Boy mentioned that there is a dominance, of course, that is well recognized of foreign technologies in the global south, and this is a key issue in terms of sovereignty of our infrastructure. Not only a material point of view, but also from a material point of view. Jamila mentioned how these artifacts modulate our behavior, and now also how those artifacts, foreign artifacts, collect the raw material to train or even to develop our own AI technologies from the perspective of a global south. So that's why it's so important to frame this debate through the lens of colonialism and also a movement of resistance here from the global south. This one was the first key message. The second one, I also recognize from all the interventions that is a key to oversight how the public sector is adopting AI, not only from the private sector, because we are right now seeing how the state is being reshaped by this scenario, and also even how we can imagine the idea of a welfare state as well. Jamila just mentioned how this interconnected with this new liberalism fashion, and also Maya mentioned how is also interconnected with the phenomenon of techno-solutionism as well. This was one of the key second messages as well of the panel. And the third one, right now we are seeing how the Global South is trying to adopt the new regulation, and the law is not a neutral tool in this game. If you could try to set up a comparative analysis, for instance here in Brazil, but also in other Latin American countries, we are seeing how EU is driven our trying to imagination of our own regulation. And we could take advance in this, for instance, when we are thinking about impact assessments or human rights impact assessments. Right now, the AI Act proposal of regulation is being very much criticized, how is not properly articulating those government tools, because at the end of the day, what we are seeing is a regulation that is reinforcing the asymmetry of power and not reducing the asymmetry of power. Yeah, and then by just trying to synthesize our discussion, I would like to invite you to pose questions for our panelists, and also invite Bowie to join us in this final part of the panel. Thank you. From the online, there is questions? Não? Não, está transmitindo não, né? Tem? Não?
Se tiver alguém vendo, tá. Mas não tem ninguém.
Tá.
Tem ele, mas eu não sei se ele está assistindo.
Tá. Tá bom. Bom, se ninguém tem, eu tenho. Alguém tem alguma pergunta? I'd like to hear more about the expression that you also use, which is the exclusion by design, and if you could explain how this specific research that you conducted in Direitos Digitais shows an empirical example of it.
Okay, thanks, Bruno, for that. I guess that dialogues a lot with what Paula was also mentioning at the beginning on what are the basis for the, and also what Maya mentioned, what are the basis or the rationality behind deciding to use AI at certain area or to solve certain problems. It's very, and we can think about bias and discrimination at least, I guess, in 3 layers. First one is the historical discrimination and historical bias, which is a lens of discrimination and a lens of colonization that orients decision-making in general, and also on how do we define using or not such technology. In the case of Chile that I was mentioning, just to go to the concrete example, you have this idea of predicting vulnerability and predicting abuse that assumes that abuse will only occur on poorer families, on vulnerable, marginalized families that are usually intersected with ethnicity, with gender, etc., as we know in the case of Latin America. So this is a first layer of bias you could imagine. And then this layer of bias naturalizes an idea of database bias and database discrimination that has to do with which are the databases that you use to train the system that you use to do this type of predictions. In this particular case, the case of Alerta in Chile, we're talking about an algorithm decision making, but we don't have so much advanced machine learning or deep learning elements. And that's why we also defend, as Direitos Digitais in the case of Brazil, if you're thinking about a regulation on AI, you have to have an expansive perspective of what you're considering AI, since you have different levels or different degrees of complexity in the systems that are being used, but you do have potential for human rights abuses. But in that particular case, you have databases that privilege this pure communities, so you have like this other layer, database discrimination, and then you have as a result a decision that is discriminatory by design, that is it's based on exclusion by design. I guess Boy mentioned exclusion by design, referring to other forms of technology also that discriminate in terms of how they train the algorithms, and we can think of facial recognition as a good example of that. And yesterday in another panel that we had with Maya, it was interesting to see a map one of the panelists brought about connectivity and where connectivity is concentrated, because this is often not in the discussion, but connectivity is also concentrated in the north, and the data that is being used to train several of the algorithms that are then offered in the global south are trained based on the data that is available. And then you tend to have, again, exclusion by design, and it is something often invisible in these debates that we have on AI. I won't expand much in case my colleagues want to comment also. I could continue the whole day.
Yeah, Boy, would you like to share some thoughts as well? I think no. Ele caiu.
Hi. It's a weird position to come to collect the mic, but I think I'm curious about your position about this. I have seen this this idea growing in Latin America, in Latin American governments, of using principles, standards, tests about the use of AI, you know? And I think Jamila did a great point, create a great point about how Latin America is a consumer rather than a producer of AI. And I would like to hear more about your position about it, because I really feel that these kind of principles, at least in the context that I better know, that is Colombia, the use of these and the discussions around these principles, these ethics, are really comfortable for companies, really comfortable for governments to avoid discussions about real implementation of algorithms. So I think sometimes I feel these kind of principles, ethics, has been really well managed by governments and companies, and I really feel that this is rather connected with lack of public procurement regulations, lack of the way in which public officers are thinking about the problems, rather than a problem about ethics and I would say soft law or regulation of this kind of yeah, that I think I made my point.
Yeah, you are totally you're totally right. Ethical frameworks first have been developed mainly in the global north, and then they are imported to the global south, as Jamila mentioned. But also, there is a lot of money invested in developing these ethical frameworks, as you said, to make the companies and the states feel comfortable about the technologies that we are using that come again from the global north and are problematic by design. So I wrote a paper about AI ethics for the majority world, because for me, at least, we are not understanding that hegemonic AI is reproducing these global orders of classification and global violence. So current AI technologies, hegemonic AI technologies that are private, are reproducing violence at scale. So if we don't understand that, we don't understand anything. So we have to be aware of how AI operates at these different levels. That is why I was mentioned that we have to connect those layers at the macro social, global, geopolitical level, then at the meso level, at the level of states and their institutions, and then at the micro political level, because we as subjects are also captured, our subjectivities are also captured by these models. So we have to understand those connections and also the impacts that are not only, we have like short-term impacts and long-term impacts, and we have to see that. And again, we have to see that the cost of developing AI technologies in this current model is paid by the Global South. So if we see the data from the digital economy, Latin America is completely erased. We are not getting anything from it. So we are being used as, not only as user, but as the main, let's say, the main mediators of these operating models. So I think we have to take this debate about ethics to that level, to connect all these layers.
Related to this point, I think it's a great point because I participated years ago in a study about the different documents of like ethical principles from governments and also from the private sector and international organizations, and that was 3 years ago, and it was okay at that time because we were at the beginning of this process of AI implementation, and we were starting to explore the field, and that was okay. But now I think we need more concrete ideas and more concrete responsibilities and obligations, because principles in general are so vague, and it's like more wishful thinking than anything else. So that's why my presentation was so concrete, I think, and just I try to make a specific point, and I would like to see more concrete work, maybe from civil society and academia, and also obviously from the government and in regulation, just to I don't know, to tell the decision makers like we should do this, and not just these vague principles and things like nice things to say. So I completely agree with that point.
Yes, just to add to what was said before, the one way in which we can, if companies are being globally questioned for their bias and their bias on database, and you have global inequalities that you're not making significant effort to overcome, one way in which you can say, well, I'm training my databases with diverse data is to force governments, is to force access to data through contracting with governments in different forms, not only for the deployment of AI, but also different types of digitization. And in that relationship, we are basically subject to data exploitation, and it's convenient for companies to protect their businesses by fostering certain types of legislation, let's say, or certain types of norms that don't actually limit their operation. What we see, the norms that are being discussed in Brazil, I guess Bruno could say much more about that. It's shameful because there is an attempt there is a clear attempt behind those draft laws to be principiological laws, to even exempt certain implementations that are being called as AI from regulation that already exists, because it's not like these technologies are being implemented in the void of regulation. You have norms that should be observed, including data protection norms, but others as well. You have norms at the administrative level that are not being observed when you directly contract with these companies. And the assumption behind this rationale is that economic development will benefit from a blanket authorization for the development of any kind of technology. And I guess that's the mistake when we think about these principles, ethical principles, etc. We are assuming that we shouldn't put any type of limitation to any type of development, regardless of the harms that it may cause. And I guess it goes completely against the international consensus that is pointing out to the need of some limitations and to recognizing that there are some risks that we cannot take. And particularly in Latin America, when we talk about public security, for instance, there are several risks that we cannot take. When we talk about inequality, there are several risks that we cannot take. And the discussion about risks is also something that should be localized and based on concrete information and evidence that we have and that we are producing with these initiatives.
A gente acho que já estourou o tempo aqui, já estou recebendo uns sinais da organização. So I'd like to thank you for the excellent presentations and also for the discussion. Yeah, and then now we can go for a lunch.